Hi everyone. So in this video, we are going to be talking about a specific tool or sort of method to figure out what kind of offspring we expect from any given set of parents. And this method is called a Punnett square. So we'll be trying to explain the ratios that I introduced in the last video, the introduction to genetics one. So remember that when Mendel was studying these pea plants, he saw that if he crossed a true breeding purple plant with a true breeding white plant, the first generation, all of the offspring were purple. But if he let these plants self-fertilize, then he got 75% of the time, the offspring were purple, but we got this white trait popping back up in a quarter of the cases. So we're going to look at these offspring ratios and use Punnett squares to see if we can explain how this happened. So when you're making a Punnett square, you'll be sort of setting up a grid, and on the top and the side of the grid, we're going to be representing the parents' alleles. And so when we think about a true breeding purple flower plant, what that means is that it only has purple alleles. Genetically, that's what a true breeding plant is that all of its alleles are just the same and they're purple. And that's why when a purple flowered plant is able to self-fertilize, it's only giving rise to other purple plants because all of its alleles are this big P purple allele. So we'll put this true breeding purple plant across the top. It doesn't matter. You're going to be having one parent on the top and one parent on the side. It doesn't matter which is which. So just pick one, and we're going to be putting the purple plant across the top. So since it's true breeding, its genetic situation is going to be that it only has big P's for the purple allele. So a big P here and a big P here. And remember that you're going to need two alleles for each organism. So one big P here and one big P here. And then your other parent is just going to go along the side. And remember, for this case, our other parent is a true breeding white plant. And this means that all of its alleles are the little p, which we said corresponds to white flowers. So this genetic makeup for this white flower is going to be only little p alleles, and we have two of them. So along the side, we're going to put a little p and another little p. So both parents are going to be across our top and our side. And then what we're going to be doing is just filling in this 4x4 grid that's sort of in the middle. And to fill it in, what we're going to do is we're going to look to the top and to the side and see what combination of letters we get. And so when you do that, you'll see that for each of these squares is going to be the same thing. If you look up, you see a big P, and if you look to the side, you get a little p. And so we're going to write big P, little p. And just out of convention, you usually always will put the big letter first and the smaller or lowercase letter second. So all of these squares are going to be the same. We've got one big P and one little p here. And the same thing for here. We've got a big P up top, a little p to the side. So big P, little p. And again, here we've got a big P on the top and a little p to the side. So big P, little p. So these are the genetic situations for all of our offspring plants. That first generation of offspring was all going to be 100%. They would have one big P from the purple plant and one little p from the white plant. But remember that we talked about this idea of dominant and recessive traits in that last video. And we said that purple is going to be dominant over white. So for a plant that has one purple allele and one white allele, the actual color that the plants are going to be is going to correspond to the dominant allele, the purple color. So all of these offspring are going to be purple colored. So that explains why in this first generation, all of the flowers that we got are purple, because they're all having one big P and one little p as their genetic makeup. So remember that, or maybe you remember, maybe you don't. The next step was that he let the F1 generation self-pollinate or self-fertilize. And so when a plant self-fertilizes, it's sort of acting as both the genetic mom and the genetic dad. So we're going to use this heterozygous condition with one big P and one little p as both sides of our new Punnett square. So to figure out the grandchildren generation, the F2 generation, we're going to set up another Punnett square, and we're going to be using a big P and a little p on both the top and the side. So that's what we see here. So we've got one purple allele and one white allele, big P, little p, and that's on the top for one parent. And same condition for this side, because this big P, little p, F1 is both the mom and the dad for the next generation. So one purple allele and one white allele for the side as well. And we're going to fill in the square just in the exact same way as we did before, looking to the top and to the side to figure out what's going to go in each of these 4 squares. And when we do this, we actually get some different results because we've got both big P's and little p's that are going to combine in different ways. And so if you look at this square right here, looking up, we have a big P, and to the side, we also have a big P. So our square here is going to be 2 capital P's, or 2 purple alleles together. Over here, we're going to have a little p up top and a big P to the side. So we've got a big P and a little p. And the same thing down here. Up top, we've got a big P, and to the side, we've got a little p. So one big P and one little p over here as well. And then finally, the sort of interesting one is going to be down in this bottom right-hand square, where if you look up to the top and to the side, both of them are little p's, or both of them are white alleles. So this square is going to be little p, or the other way to think about it is having 2 white alleles. And when you think about what actual physical characteristics are going to correspond with each of these genetic combinations, you'll see that 3 of the 4 squares, or 75%, are going to be purple because they have at least one purple allele, the dominant allele. So both of these are what we would call heterozygous because their 2 alleles are different. One is purple and one is white. But because the purple allele is dominant, both of these will show up as purple. And then obviously this one is going to show up as purple because it has 2 purple alleles. It's going to be homozygous for that purple allele. So 75%, or 3/4 of the offspring, will be purple, but the remaining 1/4, or 25%, is going to be white because it has 2 little p's, or 2 white alleles. So it's going to show up as white because it doesn't have a dominant purple allele present. And this exactly corresponds with the results that Mendel saw in his F2 generation, in that grandchildren generation. He saw 3/4 of the plants that were purple and 1/4 of the plants that were white. So using these Punnett squares is a way for us to figure out, from 2 parents where we know the genotypes, what sort of offspring do we imagine, or what sort of offspring can we predict they'll have. And I've been using the phrase like genetic situation or genetic makeup, and talking about purple and white. But as the very last slide for this presentation, I want to just introduce 2 vocabulary words to talk about when we're thinking about what alleles an organism has and what the actual trait that's going to show up is. The 2 words to talk about those things. And those 2 words are genotype and phenotype. So I'm going to start by talking about genotype. And genotype just refers to the alleles that an organism has. So we could be talking about big P, big P, big P, little p, little p, little p. All of those are referring to what alleles the organism has. The other way that we could refer to a genotype is talking about the homozygous or the heterozygous condition. So we introduced those words in the last video. Remember, homozygous is when you have 2 of the same allele, and heterozygous is when you have 2 different alleles. And so the 3 possibilities are that you could be homozygous dominant. So that's when you have 2 of the dominant allele. So for example, 2 of the purple flower alleles. You could be homozygous recessive, and that's if you have 2 of the recessive allele. So in this case, having 2 white flower alleles. Or you can be heterozygous, where you have 1 purple allele and 1 white allele. And all of these, homozygous and heterozygous, dominant and recessive, all refer to an organism's genotype, because by saying that an organism is homozygous dominant, you're really talking about what alleles it has. So genotype is referring to the alleles or the genetics of an organism, and then phenotype is referring to the characteristics or traits that are brought about by those alleles, that are caused by the genotype. So the most obvious things would be something like color or other sort of visible traits that you can see as a result of genotype. So when we think about a genotype that's big P, the phenotype that corresponds from that genotype is purple flowers. Or if you think about a genotype of being homozygous recessive, or little p, the phenotype that comes about is white flowers. So both of these are sort of visible outcomes of an organism's genotype. So anything that you can see, anything that's visible, that's going to be part of an organism's phenotype. And then there are also less visible traits that we would still count as phenotype, but aren't as visible. So an example might be whether you're lactose tolerant or lactose intolerant. That's a trait that you have that's brought about by your genotype, but it's not visible in the same way that like hair color or eye color is, but it still counts as a phenotype because it's a trait that's brought about by your genotype. So these two words, genotype and phenotype, are just ways to talk about when you do a Punnett square. So I'm just going to go back one slide. When we're talking about the genotypes of the offspring, we would say that there's a quarter of the genotypes is going to be homozygous recessive or little p. Another quarter of the offspring are going to have the genotype of being homozygous dominant or big P, and 50% of the offspring are going to be heterozygous for their genotype, one big P and one little p. But when you look at phenotype, those ratios are going to change because 75% of the offspring are purple, and that's the phenotype, and 25% of the offspring are white as their phenotype. So just being careful to be really thoughtful about whether you're referring to genotype, which is the genetics or the alleles, or phenotype, which is the trait that you're looking at in offspring. Okay, so this was a video about Punnett squares, and we'll get lots more practice with this in class, and I'll see you all soon.